Keisha Reynolds stood at the edge of the glass balcony in her Atlanta office, watching the sun pour its first golden light over the skyline. It had been nearly 10 years since she'd founded Reynolds Innovations in a co-working space with no more than a refurbished laptop, a borrowed printer, and a dream that had kept her awake most nights. Today, she was preparing to sign a merger deal worth $500 million with Whitmore & Company, one of the oldest and most respected names in the educational publishing industry. She smoothed the front of her tailored navy blue suit, a subtle emblem stitched inside, the lapel reading Legacy. It was a reminder to herself more than anyone that her journey had been about more than numbers and tech. It had always been about building something that outlasted her, and this merger, if done right, could accelerate the reach of her mission: modern, accessible education for every student, regardless of geography or income. At 38 years old, Keisha had grown accustomed to boardrooms filled with doubt, to executives doing double takes when she entered the room. She was always the outlier, the one they hadn't expected, the black woman with a southern accent who didn't just belong at the table, but had built her own. Still, this morning she felt something different. Not nerves, not fear, but a cautious hope, the kind you feel just before you leap. Her assistant, Damon, stepped into the office, holding her itinerary. "Jet's ready whenever you are. You'll land in Connecticut by 5 o'clock. Dinner with the Whitmores is at 7 o'clock sharp. Formal attire recommended." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "Dinner? Formal? Got it." Her tone was light, but something about that note made her pause. She had expected the Whitmores to be more modern, especially given the digital transformation her company was offering. But perhaps it was just tradition. No reason to read too much into it. Not yet. By late afternoon, the private jet coasted above layers of clouds. Keisha looked out the window, watching the cotton-white softness pass below. Damon sat across from her, going over final details of the agreement. They requested a clause allowing for gradual integration of leadership teams over the next 12 months. Nothing alarming, but it's clear they're cautious. Keisha nodded, flipping through the document on her tablet. They've been in business for over a century. "I imagine change feels like a threat, not an opportunity." Damon hesitated. "You sure you want to go through with this?" She met his gaze. "I didn't get this far by avoiding difficult rooms. Besides, I want to see how they carry themselves in their own space. That'll tell me more than any contract ever could." The Whitmore estate sat on a sprawling property surrounded by trimmed hedges, ornate fountains, and a circular driveway wide enough for 3 cars to pass simultaneously. The mansion was stately. White columns, limestone walls, and windows that looked like they'd witnessed more than a few secret meetings. A butler opened the heavy mahogany door, his face trained in polite neutrality. Inside, the scent of polished wood and aged wine filled the air. Portraits lined the walls. Generations of Whitmores, all pale-skinned and stern-eyed, dressed in styles that marked the slow evolution of American wealth. Gerald Whitmore greeted her with a firm handshake. "Miss Reynolds, welcome to our home. It's not every day we host someone of your reputation." Keisha smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I appreciate the invitation." His wife, Helena, offered a thin smile and a once-over. "We've heard much about Reynolds Innovations. Quite the modern marvel. Keisha has done remarkable work," Damon said, stepping forward to introduce himself. Gerald gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we? We don't stand on too much ceremony, but old habits die hard." As they entered, Keisha noticed the place settings: crystal glasses, vintage silverware, candlelight flickering against the soft gold wallpaper. It was beautiful in a way, also very clear. She was in their world now. Dinner began with pleasantries, a discussion about market trends, the evolution of publishing. Eliza Whitmore, the youngest daughter, asked a few pointed questions about digital scalability and engagement analytics, clearly informed and interested, but for the most part, the mood was restrained, observant, as though everyone at the table were studying her, waiting to decide how they felt. At one point, Helena made a comment about the challenges of over-digitizing learning environments. "There's something irreplaceable about printed material," she said. "I'm sure even your students find too much screen time draining." Keisha responded smoothly. We actually integrate tactile activities into our programs. The key is balance, not replacement. Helena nodded but didn't respond. The conversation moved on, but the air felt slightly cooler. Near the end of the meal, as the plates were cleared, Gerald turned to Keisha and said, I'll admit, it's refreshing to see someone with your passion. The tech world can feel quite impersonal. Keisha caught the hesitation. She wasn't sure what word he decided not to say. Thank you, she replied. Passion is what built this company. That, and an unwavering belief in what's possible when we stop making assumptions about what people can learn and who gets to teach them. There was a brief silence. Even Damon sat straighter in his seat. Gerald smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. Indeed. Well, let's see where the future takes us. The meal ended not long after. As she walked out to the waiting car, Keisha replayed the evening in her mind. Nothing overt. No one had raised their voice. No insult had been spoken outright, but there had been something just beneath the surface, a current of skepticism, an unspoken question of whether she truly belonged at their table. She looked at Damon as the car pulled away. That wasn't the meeting I expected. He exhaled slowly. No, but it might be the one we needed. Keisha stared out the window, jaw set, her vision no longer clouded by hope alone. Tomorrow, she would look deeper, because tonight, the real merger hadn't begun. Not in paperwork, not in numbers, but in the space between two worlds that didn't yet understand each other. And someone would have to bridge that gap. Someone like her. The sun had already begun to lower behind the thick tree lines of Connecticut when Keisha's car pulled into the Whitmore estate for the second time in 24 hours. This time, the atmosphere felt even more imposing. The previous night's formal dinner still lingered in her mind, not as a moment of hospitality, but as a performance staged with deliberate stiffness. What should have been a warm welcome had turned into a carefully curated display of decorum, one that revealed more through its omissions than its words. Damon remained behind at the hotel, working with the legal team on some pending revisions, which left Keisha attending the second invitation alone. Gerald Whitmore had asked her to return for what he described as a more informal evening with the family. The language of the request had been ambiguous, and Keisha wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Still, she had learned long ago that proximity often brought clarity. So she had accepted, determined to read between the lines if she had to. A valet opened her door, and Keisha stepped out wearing a tasteful beige blouse tucked into black slacks, professional, but intentionally softer than her corporate attire from the night before. Inside, the mansion looked slightly different. The long formal dining table had been replaced by a series of smaller, circular ones arranged in the lounge area, where a few members of the Whitmore family already sat with drinks in hand. The mood was less rigid, the lighting warmer, and a soft jazz quartet played in the corner near the grand piano. Eliza was the first to approach her. "You made it," she said with a smile that felt more genuine than anything Keisha had encountered the previous evening. "I was hoping you would." "I appreciate the invitation," Keisha said, scanning the room as they exchanged a brief hug. "This is our version of casual," Eliza added with a slight roll of her eyes. "It still involves silver trays and linen napkins, unfortunately." Keisha chuckled softly, though her attention remained half-occupied with surveying the other guests. Tonight's gathering appeared to include a few extended family members, cousins, spouses, and even a couple longtime Whitmore employees whose familiarity with the host was evident in their relaxed posture. Still, there was a visible divide. Some faces lit up when they recognized her. Others barely concealed their discomfort. Within minutes, Gerald appeared by her side, a glass of scotch in hand. "Keisha, I trust your accommodations are to your liking?" "They are," she replied with poise. "Thank you again for the hospitality." "Good, good." He sipped from his glass. "Tonight's less about business, more about building comfort. These mergers aren't just transactions, they're relationships, after all." Keisha nodded, resisting the urge to point out that relationships required more than small talk and silent judgments. Gerald motioned toward one of the smaller tables. "Join us." She followed him and sat beside Helena, who offered her a restrained smile. Across from her was Franklin Whitmore, Gerald's younger brother and the firm's chief financial officer. His demeanor was precise, almost surgical, his words chosen with care but laced with a vague air of superiority. As a waiter poured wine into her glass, Franklin leaned in. "I've reviewed your platform's architecture. Interesting approach, lean and adaptable, very Silicon Valley." Keisha sensed the preamble. "We designed it to be scalable without sacrificing accessibility. Schools shouldn't need enterprise budgets to benefit from innovation." "Of course," he said, though some would argue that such flexibility invites inconsistency in quality. Whitmore has always prioritized structure over speed. The word sat there for a moment, heavy and unresolved. Before Keisha could respond, Helena interjected. "Our readers and clients value tradition. It's not just about how content is delivered. It's about the trust behind it. That's something earned over generations, not coded into a platform overnight." Keisha folded her hands on the table. "I completely agree that trust is earned. That's why we measure outcomes: student engagement, academic performance, equity of access. Trust isn't just longevity. It's results." There was a pause, and for a split second, Keisha wondered if she'd gone too far. But then Eliza, who had quietly joined at the table, smiled and added, "And those results are why Reynolds Innovations has schools in 15 states on waiting lists. That's not just innovation, it's leadership." Helena's expression remained unreadable, but Franklin offered a polite nod. The conversation drifted towards safer subjects: education funding trends, demographic shifts in school systems, the integration of artificial intelligence in personalized learning. Still, beneath the surface, Keisha could feel the tension. An old guard reluctantly entertaining the presence of change. Later, as the evening thinned and guests began to migrate toward dessert tables and coffee service, Keisha found herself momentarily alone on the stone terrace that overlooked the back lawn. The night air was crisp, filled with the scent of trimmed grass and distant blooming hydrangeas. She allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. A voice joined her quietly. "You handled that well." It was Eliza again, now holding a glass of something citrusy. "I wasn't trying to handle anything," Keisha replied. "Just being honest." "That's what made it effective," Eliza said. "You don't apologize for your presence. It unsettles some of them." Keisha turned to her. "Why invite me here tonight? What was this really?" Eliza hesitated. Part of it was politics. They needed to feel like they'd welcomed you on their terms. But part of it was for me. I wanted to see how they would react if they had to sit with someone who didn't conform to their expectations. Keisha studied her. "And what did you see?" Eliza gave a bittersweet smile. "People revealing more in silence than in speech. But also the start of something they don't even know they're beginning to understand." They stood in thoughtful quiet for a while before Keisha asked, "Is there any real openness to this merger, or am I walking into a structure that's already decided what it wants from me?" "That depends," Eliza said, "on whether you're willing to play the long game or ready to walk away." Keisha didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she looked back toward the glowing interior of the estate, where figures moved behind expensive glass, unaware of how exposed they were from this vantage point. "I don't need them to like me," she said finally, "but I do need them to respect what I built." Eliza lifted her glass. "Then maybe they're the ones who need to do the adjusting." A moment later, Helena appeared in the doorway, calling Eliza back inside. Keisha watched her go, thoughtful and calm, then stepped back into the room as well. She didn't belong in their world. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because their world had not yet imagined someone like her walking to the front door, and that, she realized, might be the very reason she had to keep walking through it. The morning after the Whitmore gathering, Keisha sat at the small glass desk in her hotel suite, reviewing notes from her legal team. The documents were clean, legally sound, financially solid, structured for mutual gain. But none of that reassured her, because what had been said over drinks and dessert was not what stayed with her. It was the pauses between statements, the practiced cordiality, and most of all, the sense that her presence was being tolerated, not embraced. She sipped slowly from her coffee, her mind still caught on Eliza's words from the night before. People revealing more in silence than in speech. She'd seen that, but she had also heard something. A brief exchange, subtle but unmistakable, that echoed now like a distant thundercloud inching closer. It had happened as she made her way from the lounge to the study, looking for a quiet space to take a call. She had passed a partially closed door, voices drifting through. She had paused, not to eavesdrop, but because a mention of her name stopped her mid-step. "I still don't see how someone running an app-based curriculum can possibly lead a company into our sphere," said a male voice she quickly identified as Franklin's. "It's not just scale, it's tone, image, stature." Another voice, more clipped and tired, perhaps belonging to a senior advisor or one of the extended family members, responded, "Gerald thinks she brings the right kind of press, and Eliza seems charmed. But if we let this get too far, we'll have to adjust more than strategy. We'll have to adjust identity." Keisha didn't wait to hear more. She had stepped away silently, her breath shallow and slow, as though movement might trigger something more invasive. The moment had passed, but it settled inside her like a stone, heavy, unmoving. Now, with the sunlight cutting across the carpet of her suite and her phone buzzing with morning updates, she forced herself to focus. This was the business she had chosen. Vision wasn't always met with open arms. Still, there was a difference between resistance and dismissal, and she was beginning to feel she was brushing against a ladder. Later that day, she returned to the Whitmore offices, a sprawling colonial-style building nestled on the edge of town. It was the first formal roundtable between her team and theirs, a strategic planning session intended to clarify roles, timelines, and integration steps. On paper, it was a technical meeting, but beneath the agenda was an unspoken subtext: negotiation of power. She entered the conference room with Damon, both dressed in their signature quiet authority. No flashy branding, no dramatic flair, just competence. Gerald greeted them with a firm handshake, smiling as though the night before had gone exactly as planned. "Keisha," he said, "good to have you back. Hope the family didn't wear you out." She offered a calm smile. "Not at all. It's always interesting to see how legacy and innovation converse." Gerald chuckled, as if she'd made a clever joke. Others around the table remained neutral. Eliza sat near the end, flipping through a printed packet, her expression unreadable. The meeting began with standard updates. A Whitmore VP walked through the timeline for departmental integration. Keisha listened, taking mental notes. But it wasn't until Franklin took the floor that the tone of the room changed. "We've been reviewing how your current communication protocols function internally," he began, speaking directly to Keisha, but addressing the room. "And while they work for a younger, more agile company, they might need refining. There's a risk of appearing, how should I put it, too relaxed with the gravitas of a merged entity." The comment, delivered with a perfectly rehearsed blend of concern and condescension, drew a few awkward glances. Damon shifted in his chair, but said nothing. Keisha held Franklin's gaze for a moment. "I take it you're referring to our internal Slack model, our team first open scheduling, or our quarterly staff pulse surveys?" she asked coolly. "All of it, really," Franklin replied. "There's a reason companies like ours have lasted generations. Structure sends a message." "To whom?" Keisha asked, her voice low and steady. "To your shareholders or to the people actually doing the work?" A slight hush passed over the room. Gerald cleared his throat and leaned forward. "I think what Franklin means," he offered, "is that our cultures come from different origins. And that's not a weakness, but it does require calibration." Keisha nodded once, then shifted in her seat. "I agree. That's why we're merging, not absorbing." The air in the room tightened. Eliza finally spoke. "Maybe we need to define which elements are up for calibration," she said. "Because if we treat culture like a weakness to be corrected, we'll fail before the ink dries on the deal." Gerald nodded slowly. "A fair point." The meeting continued with clipped formality. Tasks were assigned, timelines proposed, but the earlier exchange had changed the temperature. Keisha spoke only when necessary, her responses precise. Franklin avoided further direct remarks, but the damage had been done. When the session ended, Keisha lingered outside the building, her coat folded over her arm as she let the wind cool her skin. Damon joined her, silence stretching between them. "You heard it, right?" she asked without looking at him. "Every word." Too relaxed, too informal, too something. He was careful, Damon said, but not careful enough. Keisha exhaled, watching a few golden leaves tumble across the parking lot. They're not ready, she said. Not for the kind of change this requires. Damon hesitated. Are we? She turned to him. I didn't build Reynolds Innovations to become someone else's accessory. We're not dressing up for a gala. We're leading a transformation. If they want that, we move. If not, you'll walk. I'll build my own empire. Damon nodded. Then maybe it's time to remind them exactly who you are. That evening, back at the hotel, Keisha began drafting a revised integration proposal. Not to please, but to define terms. Not to appease, but to clarify boundaries. The language was firm, clear, and non-negotiable. The tone was respectful, but unapologetic. She didn't send it yet. Not until morning. First, she needed to sleep, because tomorrow it would no longer be about charm or courtesy. It would be about power. The next morning unfolded under a veil of tension that no amount of sunlight could disperse. Keisha stood at the edge of her hotel balcony, phone in hand, scanning the revised integration proposal she had finalized the night before. Her fingers hovered over the send button for several seconds before she lowered the device. There was something in her gut, an instinct sharpened over years of strategic decision-making, that told her to wait. Today would demand more than policy and posture. Something was shifting. She could feel it. At precisely 10 o'clock, a call came through from Gerald Whitmore's office. His assistant, impeccably polite, informed Keisha that Gerald had requested a private meeting at the estate later that afternoon. No agenda was specified. The tone was casual, but she knew better than to believe that. When a man like Gerald Whitmore invited you alone to his stronghold, it wasn't for coffee and small talk. By 4 o'clock, Keisha found herself once again approaching the sprawling grounds of the Whitmore estate. This time, she walked in without Damon. No second set of eyes. No buffer. Just her and whatever came next. Gerald was waiting in the study, a dark, wood-paneled room filled with leather-bound books and the scent of old cigars. He stood when she entered, offering a warm but calculated smile, gesturing to a chair opposite his. "Thank you for coming," he said as she took her seat. "I thought it was time we had a different kind of conversation." Keisha crossed her legs, hands folded neatly in her lap. "I agree." He poured himself a drink from the sideboard, but didn't offer her one. That in itself was a message. She made note of it and said nothing. Gerald sat, leaned slightly forward, and fixed his eyes on her. "Keisha, I want you to know that I admire what you've built. Deeply, what you've accomplished with Reynolds Innovations is nothing short of extraordinary." She nodded once. "Thank you. But admiration doesn't always equal alignment," he continued, each word deliberate. "You and I, we come from very different schools of leadership, different experiences, different philosophies." "I'm aware," she replied calmly. "I've been thinking a lot about the road ahead," he said, his voice lowering. "And I believe we need to be pragmatic about what this merger can and cannot support in its early stages." Keisha leaned slightly forward. "I'm listening." Gerald placed his glass on the table with a soft clink. The Whitmore brand has endured for over 150 years. And with that legacy comes an ecosystem that doesn't always respond well to abrupt shifts in visibility, especially those tied to public leadership. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're referring to my role?" "Yes." He folded his hands. "What I'm suggesting is a modification to the structure, a transitional period where your role is framed more as a senior advisor, strategic, vital, but less front-facing." Her breath remained steady, but her spine straightened just enough to signal a shift. "You're proposing I step aside from the CEO title?" "Temporarily," he said. "Let the dust settle. Let the teams adjust. Once the new structure finds its rhythm, we revisit." Keisha studied him for a long moment. And during this time, who would be the visible leader? Gerald didn't hesitate. Someone from the Whitmore side. Perhaps Franklin. Perhaps another candidate. Someone who understands our existing infrastructure. And what would the public be told? That Reynolds Innovations had merged successfully into a larger vision. That leadership is being consolidated to ensure seamless integration. No scandal. No scandalous omission. Keisha allowed silence to stretch between them, not because she didn't have words, but because she knew the weight of saying too much too soon. She had dealt with men like Gerald before, men who couched threats in language of caution, who masked exclusion in strategy. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold steel wrapped in velvet. Let me see if I understand. You want me to surrender the public face of the company I built from scratch. You want me to recede, so your people feel less uncomfortable with my presence. I want to protect the merger, Gerald said, and I want to protect you from becoming the center of unnecessary friction. You mean headlines, she corrected. You want to protect your brand from the optics of being led by someone who doesn't look like the last dozen men on your board. Gerald sat back, his expression unreadable. You're making this about race. It's not. No, she said, her voice steady. I'm making it about power, and who gets to hold it. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. Gerald's tone softened. Keisha, we're offering you long-term equity, a secure advisory role, and generous compensation. This isn't erasure. It's preservation. The real influence is in the title. She cut in the visibility, in the narrative, and you're asking me to erase myself from it. Gerald didn't respond. Keisha stood, slowly. You know what I see, Gerald? A man who knows he can't build a future on his own, but still wants to control who gets the credit for it. He rose as well, hands in his pockets. I had hoped you'd see this as strategy, not sacrifice. I do, she said, but not mine. Without another word, she walked out of the study. The long hallway felt even longer now, her footsteps echoing like drum beats against the silence. As she stepped outside, the cold air slapped her face, grounding her. The driver opened the car door, but she paused before entering. Her phone buzzed. It was Damon. You all right? He asked immediately. No, she said, but I'm clear. Back at the hotel, Keisha didn't speak to anyone. She changed into a loose sweater, tied her hair back, and opened her laptop. She pulled up the original merger draft and began marking it. Her notes were not suggestions. They were lines drawn in ink. Titles would not be symbolic. Roles would not be temporary. Leadership would be shared, visibly, equally, or not at all. Her fingers moved quickly, fueled by more than disappointment. This was not the first time someone had underestimated her resolve, but it might be the last time they tried. When she finally stopped, the screen was glowing with a redrafted future, one she wasn't asking for permission to inhabit. She hit save, leaned back, and let the silence fill the room. Tomorrow, the Whitmores would see exactly what her presence meant. The knock on Keisha's hotel room door came at an unexpected hour, just after 9 o'clock in the morning, when she was still nursing her first cup of black coffee and reading the digital press coverage from the previous week's announcement. Most headlines were focused on the financial promise of the Reynolds-Whitmore merger, praising the strategic brilliance of combining a legacy educational brand with a fast-growing tech disruptor. But even within the optimism, she noticed a recurring phrasing. Whitmore leads historic partnership, or tech startup joins forces with century-old publishing giant. Her name appeared, but only after the names of men who had invited her to step aside. She placed the coffee down, walked to the door, and opened it. Eliza stood there, her expression serious but not tense, a folded folder in one hand and a wool coat draped over her arm. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back, as though she had rushed out without her usual polish. Can I come in? She asked. Keisha hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Of course. Eliza entered and immediately walked toward the window, pausing as if gathering her words. Keisha waited near the table, arms crossed, wary but curious. They had spoken only briefly at the round table, and since then, Eliza had remained silent, neither defending her family's decision nor speaking out against it. I had to talk to you before you make any decisions, Eliza said finally, turning to face her. I heard what happened with my father yesterday. Keisha didn't respond. She simply watched her. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. Eliza offered. Yes, Keisha said, her tone calm but direct. He did. Eliza sighed. Maybe he did. But I need you to know that not everyone in that room agrees with him. Some of us believe this merger only works if it's a true partnership, not theater, not branding, real leadership, real presence. And you are the reason that possibility exists. Keisha remained silent for a moment longer, then moved to sit. So why say this now? Why not speak up in the room? I've been speaking up, Eliza said, lowering her voice slightly. Just not always where you can hear it. Then say it here, Keisha said, motioning to the seat across from her. Out loud. To me. Eliza sat. Her hands rested on the folder, but she didn't open it yet. The truth is, I grew up in a house learning how to preserve power without ever naming it. We were taught to be stewards of legacy, but no one taught us how to make room for voices outside our own echo chamber. I've spent the last 10 years trying to undo that training without breaking the family completely. Keisha raised an eyebrow. And how's that going? Terribly, Eliza said with a tired laugh. But I haven't stopped trying. Keisha leaned forward. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm not just here as Gerald's daughter. I'm also one of the executive leads on the integration team. And I saw what you did with the proposal last night. I know you're thinking about walking. I'm not thinking about it, Keisha said. I'm preparing for it. Eliza nodded. Then let me give you something before you decide. She opened a folder and handed over a document. An internal memo circulated among the Whitmore board members. Keisha scanned the lines quickly, recognizing parts of conversation that had clearly taken place after a private meeting with Gerald. Phrases jumped out at her. Brand cohesion concerns, potential backlash from existing partnerships, reputation risk of radical visibility. Eliza pointed to a line near the bottom. That paragraph was written by Franklin, but there was no vote taken. This is not official strategy. It's panic dressed up as policy. My father's trying to appease them before anyone sees weakness. Keisha looked up. And you? I'm not asking you to give in. I'm asking you not to walk yet. Keisha closed the folder and sat back. You're assuming I still want this. You do, Eliza said without hesitation. You just don't want it like this. And you shouldn't. They sat in silence again, the morning light streaming in behind Eliza, casting a soft edge to her sharp words. I was 14 the first time I saw a black woman speak in one of our boardrooms, Eliza said. She was a consultant. My uncle called her sharp but emotional, behind her back after she left. I remember thinking she had said nothing different from the men in the room, only more clearly. But he never forgot that she didn't smile when she disagreed. Keisha stared at her, letting the weight of the story settle. You're not emotional, Eliza said. You're decisive, and that's terrifying to people who spent decades convincing themselves they're the only ones allowed to be. Keisha stood, walking toward the window. You realize this is more than just corporate alignment. This is about who gets to shape the future, and who's expected to sit quietly while it's shaped around them. I know, Eliza said, and I also know that if you stay in this deal, you'll change how leadership looks inside companies like mine forever. Not by assimilation, but by holding your space until the walls bend around you. Keisha turned, her expression unreadable. And what if they never bend? Eliza smiled sadly. Then at least they'll hear them crack. A long pause followed. Then Keisha asked, Why are you really here, Eliza? Eliza stood, gathering the folder and her coat. Because I don't want to be the only one in that building pushing for change. Because I believe you're not just the right partner. We need you more than you need us. And I think you already know that. Keisha watched her walk toward the door. Eliza, she said before she reached it. She turned. I won't disappear, Keisha said. Not for comfort. Not for optics. Not for legacy. Eliza nodded. I didn't think you would. After the door closed behind her, Keisha stood alone in the quiet, the folder still resting on the table, the day's headlines glowing faintly from her laptop screen. She didn't open the laptop again. Instead, she sat down, pulled a fresh sheet of paper from her notebook, and began writing not strategy, not terms, but a list of every principle she refused to compromise, every reason she had built Reynolds Innovations in the first place. Every person who had ever told her, "Not yet, not like this, not you." And across the top, in capital letters, she wrote one sentence. No more adjustments that shrink the mission. It was not the language of a resignation. It was a declaration. The following afternoon brought a break in the weather. Gray skies gave way to a crisp, clear light that spilled through Keisha's hotel windows and illuminated the documents still scattered across the table. She had barely touched them since Eliza's visit. Instead, she had spent most of the morning in deep thought, pacing the room between short bursts of writing in her notebook, occasionally stepping onto the balcony to breathe. She hadn't sent any revised proposals. She hadn't issued any statements. She was not retreating, but she wasn't rushing forward either. The pause, for once, felt strategic, and that shift of not reacting created space. Space that was interrupted mid-afternoon by a message from Eliza. "Can you meet me off-site? There's someone I want you to speak with." Not a Whitmore. Different voice. Might offer a lens that matters. "I'll send a car." There was no time given, only a follow-up location. A converted industrial loft on the edge of New Haven, about 40 minutes away. Keisha hesitated briefly, but curiosity outweighed caution. She sent Damon a quick update, told him to hold all calls, and within the hour, she was on her way out of the city. The ride was quiet, the car cutting through back roads as the landscape shifted from manicured suburbs to old warehouses now repurposed into art studios and startup spaces. The address led her to a 3-story building with tall windows and a modest plaque near the front door that read Trio Commons. Inside, she found a small co-working hub bustling with quiet energy. Writers typing, designers sketching, 2 teachers talking animatedly over curriculum slides. Eliza was waiting near a coffee counter, dressed down in jeans and a long cardigan. She gave a small nod as Keisha entered, then gestured toward a back corner where a single glass door led to a private room. "I wanted to bring you somewhere that looks more like your world than mine," Eliza said. Neutral ground. Keisha followed her into the room, where a woman in her early 60s stood waiting beside a long table cluttered with books and notepads. She wore thick glasses and a loose linen blazer, her salt and pepper curls tied back in a knot. When she turned, her eyes lit with recognition, not of fame, but of alignment. "Keisha Reynolds," she said warmly. "I've been hoping to meet you." Keisha extended her hand. "And you are?" "Dr. Marla Sutton. I run a policy institute focused on education equity. I used to be a school superintendent. Now I spend most of my time helping people fix what they call innovation, but I've never actually tested in the real world." Keisha smiled slightly. "Then we probably cross paths without knowing it." "I imagine we have," Dr. Sutton replied. "I brought you here because Eliza mentioned you might be standing at the edge of a decision that's bigger than a contract." Keisha glanced at Eliza, who remained by the door, silent now. "I'm listening," Keisha said, sitting down across from Dr. Sutton. "What you're dealing with isn't unusual," Sutton began. "A legacy institution trying to preserve its identity while absorbing change it doesn't fully understand. They bring you in to innovate, but expect the culture to stay intact. What they're really doing is managing discomfort, not growth." Keisha nodded once. "I know. But here's the twist," Sutton continued. "The resistance isn't always rooted in prejudice. Sometimes it's just a fear of irrelevance. They know what you built threatens to make their model obsolete, and that fear makes people behave in cowardly ways. They won't say that out loud, but it's underneath every delay, every adjusted term." Keisha leaned back in her chair, listening more closely now. "Your instinct might be to walk away to prove a point," Sutton said. "But let me offer another lens. Sometimes staying is the more radical move." Keisha tilted her head. "Explain." "Because walking away preserves your dignity, but staying on your terms shifts the entire architecture. You normalize power in spaces that were never designed to hold it. You force evolution. Quietly, consistently. Not by begging for space, but by refusing to shrink in it." Keisha folded her arms. "But at what cost? If I stay and they keep pushing back, what do I lose in the process?" "That depends on your boundaries," Sutton said. "Which ones are flexible? Which ones are sacred? And whether the people around you know the difference." Eliza finally spoke. That's what I've been trying to tell my family. They want the credibility of a partnership with Reynolds Innovations without confronting the implications. But if we don't face those implications, we don't deserve the partnership. Keisha glanced between the two women. And what makes you think it's worth saving? Sutton smiled. Because the merger as a concept is powerful. The idea that old world legacy and new school innovation can coexist on equal ground is not just rare, it's revolutionary. But only if the terms reflect that reality. Eliza stepped forward. And that's where you still have leverage. My father believes a merger is slipping through his fingers. If you walk, he loses more than headlines. He loses investors. Influence. The board is watching closely. Keisha stared at the table for a long moment, then looked back at Sutton. And if I stay but redefine the frame? Sutton nodded. Then you lead. And you force them to decide whether they're truly ready for transformation or just using the word to buy time. Keisha stood slowly. Her body was still, but her mind was in motion. I've never had the luxury of playing games, she said. Every room I've entered, I had to be 3 times better just to be seen as capable. And now they're asking me to step back, not because I'm unqualified, but because I remind them of how much has to change. That's exactly why you stay, Sutton said. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove you were always right. As Keisha left the building, Eliza walked with her to the curb. I know I can't fix what they said, Eliza said, but I'll fight beside you to fix what they do next. Keisha nodded. Then get ready, because I'm not changing who I am to fit their narrative. The narrative's about change. They didn't shake hands or hug. They didn't need to. Something unspoken had shifted. As the car pulled away, Keisha opened her phone and began rewriting the statement she'd been too cautious to send. This one was different, not defensive, not corrective. This time it was a directive, and this time she wouldn't ask. By the time Keisha returned to Atlanta, the skyline that once brought her calm now seemed to pulse with a different energy. She had always viewed the city as a launch pad for everything Reynolds Innovation stood for: access, elevation, impact. But now, stepping into her headquarters after nearly a week of tense negotiations and coded battles in Connecticut, she saw the glass walls and sleek furniture as markers of a company standing on the edge of a pivotal choice. Her assistant, Mel, met her at the entrance with a stack of folders and a knowing look. Boards assembling in the main conference room. They're expecting a briefing on the final draft of the merger terms. Keisha didn't flinch. Good. That's exactly what they'll get. The board of Reynolds Innovations was a mix of early believers, recent investors, and longtime collaborators. Each of them shaped by Keisha's leadership, but not immune to pressure from the outside. The moment she walked into the room, every head turned. She could feel their anticipation pressing in from every direction. She opened her laptop without preamble, connected it to the display, and projected a revised document titled Updated Strategic Pathway, Post-Negotiation Draft. Before anyone could speak, she began. Thank you all for being here on short notice. What I'm about to share isn't simply a response to the Whitmore proposal. It's a reaffirmation of what this company was built to do and how we will continue doing on terms that match our mission, not compromise it. The room fell silent. Pens paused. Fingers lifted from keyboards. Keisha clicked to the first slide, revealing 3 columns labeled Original Agreement, Whitmore Proposed Amendments, and Reynolds' Position Going Forward. They offered transitional leadership structure that would publicly reassign my role to an advisor capacity, she said. I rejected it. No one interrupted. I rejected it not because I felt personally insulted, though I was, but because it would set a precedent that goes against everything we've worked to create here. Visibility matters. Representation matters. Leading out loud matters. One of the board members, Anthony Jameson, a venture capitalist and one of her earliest backers, leaned forward. What's the fallback? If they don't accept your terms, are we prepared to disengage completely? Yes, Keisha said without hesitation. And we have contingencies already being evaluated. Another board member, Maria Costas, head of a public education foundation, and a steady voice of reason, raised an eyebrow. You're willing to walk away from a $500 million merger? Keisha met her gaze. Only if staying means giving away more than we gain. The room went quiet again. Anthony cleared his throat. Let's talk risk. If we pull out, what are we telling the public? What are we telling investors who've already signaled interest based on this deal? Keisha clicked to the next slide. Public messaging scenarios. We don't frame it as walking away. We frame it as redirection, clarity, integrity, a leader protecting the company's mission. We've already begun drafting the communication strategy. We don't apologize for refusing to disappear. There was a pause before Maria spoke again. Do you believe there's still a path forward with Whitmore? Keisha considered her answer. Yes, but it's narrow. It would require them to accept the merger as a partnership of equals, not a symbolic acquisition. And they'd need to respond soon. Otherwise, we pivot. Anthony nodded slowly. And the pivot is... Keisha opened a second presentation, this one labeled Alternative Capital Plan. We've had preliminary conversations with a group of independent investors, values-aligned, education-focused, innovation-driven. They're interested in helping us scale without surrendering control. If Whitmore continues to delay or insists on conditions that erase our leadership, we initiate talks with this group. Maria tapped her pen. Are they offering comparable financial backing? They're offering flexible capital with fewer bureaucratic strings, Keisha replied. It's not just about the number. It's about the cost of that number. One of the newer board members, Derek Vaughn, a former university dean with strong ties in policy circles, broke his silence. This is the crossroads. One way leads to faster scale through legacy validation. The other demands more time, more effort, but keeps the soul of what we're building intact. Keisha looked at him. Exactly. He nodded. Then the question is, are we here to prove we belong in their room, or to keep building our own? Keisha stepped back from the screen. I'm not here to conform to outdated models. I'm here to find new ones. And I need to know if you're standing with me when I say that publicly. The room fell into a collective silence, thoughtful and charged. Maria finally spoke, her tone measured. I've worked in systems that swallowed visionaries whole. You have my support, as long as we're clear-eyed about the climb. Anthony exhaled. If you're willing to lead to the storm, I won't be the one pulling the umbrella. Derek nodded again. Let's make history, not headlines. Keisha closed the laptop. Then let's move forward. Whitmore will have until the end of the week to respond to the revised terms. If they won't meet us at the table, we build a new one. As the meeting concluded, several board members lingered to shake her hand, offering quiet encouragement and reaffirming their belief in the vision. When the room had finally emptied, Keisha stood alone, staring at the empty seats, the weight of what lay ahead pressing into her shoulders. Mel stepped in, holding a printed envelope. This came in while you were presenting. Messenger dropped it off directly from Connecticut. Keisha took the envelope, opened it, and scanned the contents. It was a formal acknowledgement from the Whitmore legal team, receipt of the revised terms. The closing line read, "The board will reconvene to consider the counterproposal within 72 hours." She folded the letter, placed it on the table, and looked out the glass wall of her office toward the city that had raised her, challenged her, and crowned her. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing. The following morning, Keisha arrived at the office early, long before the elevators started filling with her team. The city outside was still stretching awake, traffic light, the sky washed in soft lavender before the sun's full rise. She hadn't slept much, but her mind was clear. Clarity, she had learned, didn't require rest, only resolve. And now, after days of negotiation, tension, confrontation, and reassertion, her resolve was sharper than ever. Still, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't angry, not anymore, nor was she anxious. There was instead a steady awareness that this moment, the one she had spent her entire career preparing for, wasn't about proving she could lead through chaos. It was about deciding which chaos was even worth leading through. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the streetlights blink off one by one. The envelope from Whitmore sat unopened on her desk, though she had read its contents the day before. 72 hours. That was the time frame. Enough time to wait. Enough time to breathe. Enough time, if she allowed herself, to step back without stepping away. By mid-morning, her leadership team had gathered for a regularly scheduled operations meeting, which Keisha restructured into something else entirely. "We're pausing all forward-facing merger activity," she announced plainly. "For the next 48 hours, I want every department head focused only on internal operations, staff wellness, and performance review analysis. We're not canceling. We're recalibrating." The room absorbed the news in silence at first. Then a voice broke it. "Jules, her head of program design. Is something wrong?" "No," Keisha said. "Something's very right. We're choosing to examine who we are before we let someone else reshape it." That same morning, she recorded a short internal video message for the entire Reynolds Innovation staff. No notes, no filters, just her, seated on the corner of her desk, addressing the people who had helped build the company from the ground up. "I know you've seen the headlines. I know you've heard the rumors. So here's the truth, directly from me. We're in the middle of a pivotal decision about the future of this company. Not just what it will look like, but what it will mean for students, for educators, for all of you who make our mission real every single day. I've paused the current negotiation timeline because I want us to move forward with intention, not pressure. If the world's watching, then let them see us lead by choice, not by circumstance." She ended the message there. No dramatic sign-off, no rehearsed statement of strength, just honesty. Within minutes of the video going live, her inbox began filling. Staff from every level of the company wrote back. Short notes of encouragement, gratitude, and reassurance. She even received messages from former interns, now educators, now product managers at other firms, all thanking her for choosing values over speed. The media, however, interpreted her pause differently. By that afternoon, a wave of articles began to surface online. Headlines ranged from "merger in trouble," "Reynolds CEO halts talks," to "Keisha Reynolds breaks silence. Is the deal falling apart?" Keisha scrolled through the coverage without flinching. She expected the noise. What mattered was how the signal traveled beneath it. What she hadn't expected was what came next. By late evening, her public relations team forwarded a private message from a high-profile investor who had previously declined participation in Reynolds' Series C funding round. Now, the tone was markedly different. "Your stand has made it clear that you're not just building tech. You're building trust. We'd like to reopen the conversation." Keisha reread the message twice. Then came another email, this one from the president of a leading urban school district, requesting a call to explore potential district-wide integration of Reynolds' platform. Then another from an academic journal editor asking for an op-ed on modern leadership in educational equity. And then came the call she hadn't expected at all. It was from a renowned television journalist whose weekly segment focused on leadership in America. They wanted to feature Keisha in a special interview, live in person, and framed around her decision to delay a historic merger. "Your voice," the producer said over the phone, "is reshaping the national conversation on leadership, and people want to hear how." Keisha didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window again, phone still at her ear, gazing out at the city that suddenly seemed to be leaning in closer. "I'm not interested in being a symbol," she said quietly. "I'm interested in building something that works." "That's exactly why we want you," the producer replied. "Let us know." She hung up without committing. The attention, though flattering, wasn't the point. What mattered was that people were finally responding not to what she had built, but to how she was protecting it. She spent that evening not in meetings, but alone. She ordered a simple dinner, turned off notifications, and opened her personal journal. The entries from the early years were still there. Sleepless nights, early doubts, scribbled ideas for products that hadn't worked but taught her how to make better ones. Her handwriting had changed, but the voice remained the same. Steady, hungry, committed. Midway through reading, she paused and began to write a new entry. There's power in pause, not in silence, but in reflection, not in retreat, but in readiness. They think I'm hesitating, but I'm preparing. And when I move again, it will be in the full light of clarity. No more adjusting for rooms that can't hold my shape. She closed the journal and leaned back in her chair. Outside, The lights of the city blinked steadily, unconcerned with corporate politics or press narratives. Inside, Keisha felt no urgency to respond to what the world was guessing. She had made her position clear. Now it was up to them to decide what kind of future they were ready to accept. In 72 hours, she would know. And in 72 hours, so would they. The 72-hour countdown was marked not by silence, but by a flood of messages, calls, and unexpected alliances that caught Keisha off guard in the best possible way. She had anticipated resistance from the Whitmore camp. What she hadn't expected was how the broader world was watching and rallying. The morning after she paused emerging negotiations, an email appeared in her inbox with the subject line, "For Keisha Reynolds, from a fellow believer." The sender was a name she recognized immediately. Amina Carter, CEO of a nationally renowned nonprofit dedicated to expanding educational access in underserved communities. Amina's message was warm but urgent. She wrote about how Reynolds Innovations platform had transformed digital classrooms in several districts where her organization operated. She praised Keisha's decision to hold firm on her principles, emphasizing that leadership required both vision and courage. The message closed with an offer of support, promising to leverage her network to amplify Reynolds' mission. Keisha responded cautiously but gratefully. Within days, that initial email snowballed into a chorus of endorsements from leaders in education, technology, and social justice. There were letters from university presidents, community organizers, former government officials, and even a few surprise notes from past rivals who now spoke of respect. Her phone began ringing with requests for conversations. One of the most unexpected calls came from a legendary philanthropist and investor who had long remained skeptical of tech startups and education. Now, he was asking if he could arrange a meeting to discuss new investment opportunities, ones that wouldn't compromise Reynolds' autonomy or values. Meanwhile, the media narrative shifted. Articles began to portray Keisha not as a CEO stumbling in negotiation, but as a leader standing up for her vision in a turbulent landscape. Podcasts invited her to speak about the intersection of technology, equity, and corporate integrity. News segments highlighted her as a rare example of a CEO refusing to bend to traditional power structures. Internally, the atmosphere at Reynolds Innovations transformed. Employees who had once voiced uncertainty about the merger now expressed pride in their CEO's resolve. Slack channels buzzed with messages of encouragement. The company's social media engagement skyrocketed as communities rallied around the idea of leadership rooted in authenticity and respect. Among this unexpected wave of support, an invitation arrived that struck a particularly resonant chord. An offer to collaborate with a coalition of independent investors who shared Reynolds' values and mission. They proposed a partnership model that would provide the capital necessary for scaling the company's technology and outreach without forcing changes in leadership or vision. Keisha and her team began detailed discussions with this group. The negotiations were careful but hopeful, marked by transparency and mutual respect rather than the guarded politeness she had encountered with Whitmore and Company. It was a refreshing contrast, one that rekindled her optimism. However, just as she was preparing to present this new option to her board, another message came from Connecticut. Whitmore and Company was requesting one final meeting. They wanted to talk again, signaling a willingness to reconsider terms, perhaps acknowledging that Keisha's leadership and vision were non-negotiable parts of the equation. Keisha saw this as both an opportunity and a challenge. The meeting would be a test of whether Whitmore was ready to embrace a true partnership or merely seeking to salvage face. She called her closest advisors and legal team, outlining her priorities for the upcoming discussion: equality in leadership, respect for cultural differences, and shared decision-making. She emphasized that she would not accept any proposal that diminished her role or compromised Reynolds' mission. The night before the meeting, Keisha reflected on the journey she had undertaken. From a startup founder fighting for a seat at the table to a national figure inspiring change. She understood that the path ahead was uncertain, but she felt prepared. She also recognized the profound impact of the unexpected support she had received, the voices that had risen in her defense, the investors willing to walk alongside rather than control, and the communities inspired by her stand. As she prepared to face the Whitmore family once more, Keisha carried with her not only her own conviction, but the weight of a movement that transcended corporate mergers, a movement toward leadership defined by integrity, inclusion, and unwavering belief in the future. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Reynolds Innovations headquarters as Keisha gathered with her executive team. The air was thick with anticipation, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of determination, a quiet readiness to embrace what was next. For weeks, they had navigated shifting currents. The turbulent merger talks with Whitmore and Company, the unexpected tide of public support, and the opening of new doors that promised a different future altogether. Today, Keisha was ready to present a new course, one born not from concession, but from conviction. The conference room buzzed as team members took their seats, laptops and tablets glowing softly under the muted overhead lights. Damon, her longtime right hand, sat beside her, exuding the calm confidence that had become their shared hallmark. The mood was serious, but hopeful. Keisha began without preamble. We have reached a crossroads. After extensive negotiations, reflection, and input from across the company and our community, I believe it's time to pursue a partnership model that fully aligns with our values and preserves our autonomy. She clicked a button, and a slide appeared titled Independent Partnership Proposal Overview. It outlined the terms she had been negotiating with the group of independent investors who had emerged during the pause in merger talks, a consortium composed of education advocates, socially responsible capitalists, and technology leaders united by a commitment to innovation without compromise. The model they offer provides substantial capital infusion, enough to accelerate product development, expand market reach, and deepen community engagement, while allowing us to retain full control over leadership and strategy. Keisha explained. This means no dilution of our mission, no sidelining of our voice. A hand raised from across the table. Maria, ever the voice of balance, asked, "What are potential trade-offs? Are there risks we should be aware of?" Keisha nodded. Every partnership carries risk. This model lacks the immediate brand cachet of a historic firm like Whitmore, which may slow initial adoption in some traditional markets. Additionally, independent investors may require more hands-on communication and oversight, which means more work on our side. Damon interjected. But the upside is greater flexibility, faster decision-making, and a partnership culture that respects our principles. They see us as equals, not assets to be assimilated. There was a brief murmur of agreement around the room. Anthony Jameson leaned forward. How does this affect our existing contracts and commitments? Are we exposed financially? Keisha was prepared. We've conducted thorough due diligence. There are no conflicts with existing agreements. In fact, this model opens new opportunities for collaboration without legacy baggage. She switched slides to market impact forecasts. Charts and graphs detail projected growth rates, user adoption trajectories, and community impact metrics. Conservative estimates that still showed substantial gains. Moreover, she added, this route aligns with the momentum we've seen since the pause. Interest from school districts, philanthropic organizations, and thought leaders who respect our integrity. The room absorbed the information. Then Derek Vaughn, the policy expert, posed a crucial question. Have you informed Whitmore of this proposal? Keisha's expression tightened slightly. We share the intention to explore alternative funding during negotiations. They've since requested another meeting, which is scheduled for later this week. Eliza Whitmore's involvement had been instrumental in facilitating communication, and Keisha trusted her insights will provide an honest gauge of Whitmore's openness or reluctance. A hand went up again, this time from a newer board member, a marketing strategist. How does this new path affect our brand identity? Keisha smiled. It strengthens it. By standing firm on our values and refusing to dilute our leadership, we send a clear message to customers, partners, and employees. We're not just another tech startup. We're a movement. She glanced around the table. This isn't just about capital or scale. It's about legacy, our legacy, the future we want to build. The room grew quiet, the weight of her words settling over everyone. After a moment, Maria spoke softly. I support this wholeheartedly. It's the kind of bold leadership that inspires trust. Anthony nodded. Count me in as well. Damon leaned back, his gaze steady. The decision feels right. It feels like us. Keisha felt a surge of gratitude for her team, their loyalty, wisdom, and shared courage. As the meeting wrapped, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The path ahead would not be easy. Forging a new model meant navigating uncharted waters. It meant building networks and partnerships from the ground up. It meant carrying the weight of every expectation, every hope, and every skepticism. But it also meant freedom. Freedom to lead authentically, to innovate boldly, to uplift communities without compromise. That evening, as the sky darkened and city lights flickered alive, Keisha sat at her desk composing a message to Whitmore and Company, a message acknowledging their upcoming meeting, affirming her commitment to principled partnership, and gently but firmly signaling her intent to pursue the independent path should collaboration prove impossible. She reread the draft several times before hitting send. Her heart beat steady, not with fear, but with purpose. Tomorrow, she would face the Whitmores once more, not as someone seeking permission, but as a leader claiming her rightful place. The Whitmore estate had not lost its grandeur, but when Keisha arrived for the meeting, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Gone was the stifling formality and subtle hostility she had encountered during previous visits. Instead, a sense of tentative openness hung in the air, fragile but unmistakably real. Gerald Whitmore greeted her in the grand foyer, his handshake firmer and eyes less guarded. Helena and Eliza stood nearby. Helena's expression was softened, almost contemplative, while Eliza's smile held a quiet confidence. It was clear this was not merely a routine business meeting. It was a turning point. They moved into the study, the same wood-paneled room, where Keisha had once been offered a diminished role. But today, the energy felt different, charged by the awareness of what had come before and what lay at stake. Gerald began, voice measured. Keisha, I want to start by acknowledging that our earlier approach was insufficient. We underestimated the strength of your vision and the depth of your commitment. Keisha met his gaze without flinching. Thank you for saying that. But words alone aren't enough. Of course, Gerald replied. We've taken the past week to reflect and to listen, particularly to Eliza, who has been a vital voice in helping us understand the real implications of this partnership. Eliza nodded, stepping forward. My family has a long history. Sometimes that history becomes a cage rather than a foundation. We've seen how change can be feared rather than embraced. But I believe this moment is different. I believe you are the leader who can guide us through it. Keisha regarded her steadily. And what does that leadership look like? In practice, Gerald gestured toward a large wooden table. We've reworked the merger proposal with a new framework, one that centers genuine collaboration, shared leadership, and mutual respect. You'll retain your role as CEO with full operational control and visibility. The Whitmore board will serve alongside your leadership team, not above it. Helena added quietly, we want to build a partnership that honors both legacies. That means dismantling old hierarchies and creating space for innovation, not just in technology, but in culture. Keisha allowed herself a moment to absorb the shift. This is more than a revision. It's a promise. How can I be sure it's sincere? Gerald's eyes were steady. Because the alternative is failure. We see now that success requires more than capital and assets. It requires trust, and we want to earn yours. Eliza leaned in. I've spoken candidly with the board. We're ready to vote on this new proposal next week. But I wanted us to have this conversation first, to hear directly from you what you need to feel this partnership is real. Keisha nodded. I need transparency. I need authority that isn't symbolic. I need a seat at every table where decisions are made, not just on paper, but in practice. And I need assurances that cultural integration will be a priority, not an afterthought. Those are reasonable, Gerald said. We're prepared to formalize them in the contract. The discussion deepened, moving through specifics. Leadership structures, joint committees, equity stakes, timelines for integration, and mechanisms for conflict resolution. For the first time, Keisha felt she was not merely negotiating terms, but co-creating a future. When the meeting drew to a close, Eliza turned to Keisha. Your vision has reshaped more than our business plans. It's reshaped our understanding of leadership. Thank you for holding firm. Keisha offered a genuine smile. Thank you for listening. As she left the estate, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the manicured grounds, Keisha felt a cautious optimism, tempered by experience, but real nonetheless. She knew the path ahead would still hold challenges. Change was never linear. But for the first time, she believed the Whitmores were ready to walk alongside her. And that made all the difference. Back in her office, Keisha sat behind her desk, the late afternoon sun casting warm shadows across the room. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, but inside her mind, a tempest of thoughts raged. The weight of the choice before her was immense. More than a corporate decision, it was a crossroads that would define her legacy and the future of Reynolds Innovations. She had just returned from the final meeting with the Whitmore family. The revised proposal was promising, marked by gestures of genuine collaboration and respect, but still carried the echoes of a century-old institution grappling with change. Their offer to reinstate her as CEO, granting operational control and board presence, was a significant step forward. Yet, the history of hesitation lingered in her mind like a shadow. Across from her, Damon sat quietly, awaiting her words, sensing the gravity of this moment. Keisha finally broke the silence. "It's a good offer. The Whitmores have shown willingness to evolve in ways I didn't expect. They're trying to meet us halfway." Damon nodded. "You trust it?" She sighed. "I want to, but I'm not naive. There are systemic challenges that can't be rewritten in a contract. Culture, power dynamics, unspoken biases, they're harder to legislate." Damon's eyes reflected understanding. "So what's the alternative?" Keisha reached for a file labeled Independent Partnership Proposal. "This," she said softly, "an opportunity to grow on our own terms, with investors who respect our mission and leadership. No compromises on autonomy, no risk of being sidelined." She opened the file, revealing charts, letters of support, and financial models projecting steady but controlled growth. "There's risk either way," she continued, "but this path aligns with who we are. The Whitmore merger promises scale and tradition, but it also carries the weight of legacy that may resist true transformation." Damon leaned forward. "And if you choose to move forward independently?" Keisha's gaze was steady. "We'll build something new, a model for leadership rooted in inclusion and innovation without apology. It won't be easy. Resources may be more limited, markets slower to open, but it will be ours." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the proposal. "I'm proud of what Reynolds Innovations has become, but I'm even more proud of what it stands for. If this means turning down a historic merger to protect that, then so be it." Damon smiled, the kind that carried both reassurance and resolve. "Then you have my support, whatever you decide." Over the next few days, Keisha convened meetings with her board, advisors, and closest confidants. Each conversation was candid, examining the merits and pitfalls of both paths. Voices ranged from cautious optimism to cautious skepticism, but all agreed on one point. Keisha's vision and leadership were the company's greatest assets. When the board formally convened to vote, the atmosphere was charged but respectful. Keisha presented her recommendation to pursue the independent partnership, emphasizing integrity, mission alignment, and long-term sustainability over short-term gains. The vote was unanimous. That evening, Keisha drafted 2 letters, one accepting the Whitmore offer with gratitude but respectfully declining, and one confirming her commitment to the independent investors. She sent the Whitmore letter first, mindful of timing and tone. In her letter to the Whitmore family, she wrote, "I have deep respect for your legacy and appreciate your efforts to meet us on more equal terms. However, after careful consideration, I believe that the path forward for Reynolds Innovations must preserve our autonomy and mission without compromise. I hope that this decision will be understood as a gesture of integrity and not division, and that it may open doors for future collaboration under different circumstances." The response came within days, a polite acknowledgement, tinged with disappointment but professional in tone. Keisha then turned her attention fully to the alternative partnership. The negotiations moved swiftly, marked by shared excitement and mutual respect. New contracts were signed, teams restructured, and initiatives accelerated. Months later, Reynolds Innovations launched a nationwide campaign promoting inclusive leadership in education technology. Schools across the country began integrating their platform, impressed not only by its innovation, but by the story behind the company, of a CEO who chose principle over prestige. In private moments, Keisha reflected on her journey. Walking away from a historic merger had been difficult, but it had also been liberating. She had learned that leadership wasn't about fitting into established molds, but about breaking them. Her handwritten letter to the Whitmore family remained on her desk, a reminder of the grace with which she had closed one chapter and the strength with which she had begun another. Reynolds Innovations was no longer just a startup. It had become a beacon of visionary leadership, proof that staying true to one's mission could indeed change the world. Months had passed since Keisha made her decisive choice to steer Reynolds Innovations independently. The reverberations of that decision had spread far beyond the polished glass walls of her Atlanta headquarters. What once was a scrappy startup had blossomed into a national symbol, a beacon of visionary leadership, inclusion, and unwavering commitment to mission. The office hummed with a new energy, one born of ownership and possibility. Teams collaborated across departments with an unshakable belief in the path they were carving. Product launches were met with enthusiastic adoption. School districts that had once hesitated now eagerly embraced their innovative platform. Invitations poured in for Keisha to speak at conferences, universities, and community forums, each appearing a chance to inspire others who saw their own struggles reflected in her story. Yet, amidst the bustle, Keisha carved out time each week for a quiet ritual. She sat at her oak desk, a worn leather-bound journal open before her, alongside the neatly folded, handwritten letter addressed to the Whitmore family that had remained untouched for months. The letter was a carefully crafted testament to respect, gratitude, and closure. In it, she thanked the Whitmores for their time, the lessons learned, and the opportunity to witness an institution grappling with change. She wished them well, sincerely, acknowledging that while their paths had diverged, the shared goal of advancing education remained a bridge between them. One rainy afternoon, as she prepared to send a new proposal to a consortium of community educators eager to partner with Reynolds Innovations, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message, a reply from Eliza Whitmore. The message was brief, yet its tone was imbued with warmth and hope. "Thank you for your letter. We are watching your journey with admiration. Perhaps in time, our paths will cross again, on equal footing and with shared vision." Keisha smiled, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. This was a grace she had hoped for, a door left ajar, a future unbound by past constraints. Beyond the correspondence, the real story was unfolding in classrooms across the country. Teachers reported how students, once disengaged, now showed renewed enthusiasm thanks to the platform's tailored lessons and interactive tools. Parents shared stories of newfound confidence and hope for their children's futures. Communities began to see technology not as a barrier, but as a bridge. At a national education summit, Keisha stood before an audience of thousands. She spoke not just about technology, but about leadership, the kind that embraces discomfort, challenges norms, and refuses to settle for less than equity. Her voice carried the weight of experience and the lightness of possibility. Leadership, she said, is not about walking away from challenges because they are difficult. It's about standing firm because you believe in the future you're building. It's about knowing your worth, not in spite of your origins, but because of them. As applause swelled, Keisha scanned the faces before her, young and old, diverse and united, and felt the culmination of a journey that began with a simple but profound understanding. She had not walked away from the deal out of pride. She had walked away because she finally understood her worth. Outside the summit, the city skyline gleamed against the setting sun, a reminder that every ending was but the start of something new. And for Keisha Reynolds and Reynolds Innovations, that new beginning was only just unfolding.